What are you doing out here?
Legally, officer, is there a problem?
License and registration. Now,
Part of a federal operation. Here's my badge.
don't tell me how this works. Step out of the vehicle.
Officer, you're interfering with the active surveillance operation.
I'm just doing.
At 2:17 a.m., beneath the sodium glow of a downtown overpass, a routine traffic stop cut through months of silence. Radios crackled. A plain sedan idled. Inside it, a federal team watched a target they had tracked for 72 days, and then a patrol car rolled in light sharp, siren brief. One officer's voice carried the weight of certainty and suspicion. In less than 4 minutes, a surveillance operation collapsed. By sunrise, careers were already unraveling. If you care about how power's used and misused, stay with this story. Not for outrage, but for understanding. Subscribe, listen closely, and sit with the uncomfortable question. This night forces us to ask about authority, bias, and consequence. The sedan had been parked for 12 minutes, long enough to feel deliberate, short enough to be suspicious if you were already looking for reasons. It sat beneath the overpass where the city exhaled at night. Oil-stained concrete, the low hiss of traffic above, sodium lights flickering like tired eyes. At 2:17 a.m., Officer Daniel Krell slowed his cruiser and let instinct do what training often encouraged. Notice what didn't fit. The windows were dark. The engine was running. No one got out. No one went in. He rolled past once, checked plates. Unmarked. Clean. Not stolen, not flagged. Still, something tightened in his chest. The area was a known corridor: auto thefts, gun runs, a shooting 2 blocks east just 3 weeks earlier. Krell keyed his mic. Voice even, procedural. Dispatch, I'm gonna check a vehicle under the I-94 overpass. Stand by. Inside the sedan, the radio was silent on purpose. 3 people sat still, breathing shallow, eyes trained forward. A federal surveillance team, ATF, and Homeland Security Task Force running a Title II authorized operation tied to interstate firearms trafficking. 72 days of work had led them here. A target was due any minute, moving a load north before dawn. The warrant sat in a binder between the seats, signed by a U.S. magistrate judge, timestamps logged, chain of custody intact. Everything was by the book, until the headlights swept across the hood. Police, Krell said, stepping out. His hand hovered near his holster, not dramatic, just ready. The body cam blinked red. Recording. He approached from the driver's side, flashlight steady. Evening. What are you doing out here? The driver, Agent Marcus Hill, didn't reach for anything. Early 40s, plain clothes, posture calm. We're parked legally, he said. His tone wasn't defiant. It was measured, practiced. Is there a problem, officer? Krell's eyes moved faces, hands, back seat. He felt the familiar pull of control, the expectation that questions would be answered cleanly and immediately. License and registration. Hill paused. Not long, just enough. Officer, we're part of a federal operation. I can provide identification, but I'm not consenting to a search, and I need you to contact your supervisor. The air shifted. Silence pressed in, heavy as the concrete above them. Krell's jaw tightened. Training manuals said cooperation was key in interagency encounters. Street reality said something else, that authority, once challenged, had to be reasserted. You don't get to tell me how this goes, he said, voice still low. I asked for ID. Hill handed over his credentials, careful, slow. The badge caught the light gold, unfamiliar. Krell looked at it longer than necessary. This doesn't mean you're above the law, he said. The words landed harder than intended, or maybe exactly as intended. In the back seat, another agent shifted. Officer, she said quietly, you're interfering with an active surveillance operation. Our command can. Don't interrupt me, Krell snapped, eyes flicking to her, then back to Hill. Step out of the vehicle. Above them, traffic roared, indifferent. Somewhere east, the target's phone pinged a location update they would miss. Inside the sedan, a silent countdown began. Hill held Krell's gaze. This is not how this should be handled, he said. Krell keyed his radio again. Supervisor requested, he said. Dispatch crackled, delayed, busy. Seconds stretched. Pride filled the gap where procedure should have been. When the lights went on brief, sharp, the operation was already unraveling, and no one, standing there beneath the overpass, fully understood yet how far the consequences would travel. Morning didn't arrive gently. It came fluorescent and cold, humming through a windowless operations room where sleep had failed everyone equally. Coffee cups lined the table like evidence markers, half drunk, untouched. On the wall, a digital clock blinked 8:41. Each second a reminder that the night was already being rewritten. The federal team reconstructed the stop in silence at first. Phones face down. jackets still on. Agent Hill spoke only when asked, his voice steady, almost detached, as if distance could be manufactured after the fact. He recited times from memory: 217 initial contact, 221 lights activated, 224 supervisor requested but not yet on scene. The missed window was narrower than anyone wanted to admit. 90 seconds, maybe less. A supervisor finally broke the quiet. Title 3, he asked, though he already knew the answer. Yes, Hill said. Court authorized. Active surveillance. We notified local command per protocol at initiation. The binder hit the table with a soft thud. Warrant. Affidavit. Judge's signature. Everything clean, everything fragile. Across town, in a different building with different rules, Officer Krell sat alone in interview room. Bodycam footage paused on a still frame, his own face, lit harshly by his cruiser's spotlight. Internal affairs had arrived early. That, too, felt deliberate. His sergeant stood behind the glass, arms folded, saying nothing. Krell watched himself on screen, the pause before he spoke, the way his shoulders squared. He remembered the moment differently. He always would. Walk us through your reasonable suspicion, an investigator said, tone neutral, pen poised. Krell exhaled. Vehicle parked under an overpass in a high-crime area. Engine running. Occupants refused to comply immediately. The investigator nodded, wrote, and when federal credentials were presented, I didn't have confirmation, Krell said. Badges can be faked. True, also incomplete. Training modules post-certified, revised 3 years earlier, covered interagency encounters explicitly. Verify. De-escalate. Contact a supervisor. The policy language was clear, the application less so. By noon, emails began stacking like sandbags against a rising tide. ATF to city command. City legal to the chief. The word interference appeared for the first time in writing. It carried weight: legal, institutional. Interfering with a federal investigation wasn't just a misstep, it was a fault line. A captain convened an emergency call. Jurisdiction was the word everyone circled without quite touching. On paper, it was simple. Local authority yielded to federal operations under specific conditions. On the street, jurisdiction felt personal, earned mile by mile, stop by stop. Pride filled the spaces policy left blank. Was race a factor? Someone asked, softly on the call. Silence. Not denial. Not agreement. Just the kind of pause that meant the question would return. By late afternoon, the target was gone. Phone's dead. Trail cold. 72 days dissolved into a line item marked compromised. No one said out loud, but everyone felt at the cost of one decision rippling outward. Krell was placed on administrative leave pending review. Standard procedure, they told him. With pay. He nodded, signed the form. The badge felt heavier in his hand than it ever had on his chest. As the sun dipped, casting long shadows through office blinds, two systems faced each other. Across a widening gap, each convinced of its own logic, each quietly bracing for impact. Somewhere between them lived the truth. And it wasn't done yet. The footage didn't explode into the public all at once. It seeped. First, a 9-second clip surfaced on a local forum, no context, no timestamp. Just the moment where voices sharpened and patience thinned. The angle was wrong, cropped too tight, but the sound was unmistakable. A command. A pause. A response that didn't submit quickly enough. By noon, it had been reposted thousands of times, stripped of nuance and dressed in certainty. By evening, the full bodycam video followed. It opened quietly, gravel crunching under boots, a flashlight beam sliding across glass. The officer's voice controlled, professional, asking a question he already felt entitled to an answer for. The early moments were almost reassuring. This was how stops began. This was normal. Then came the pause. Experts would later point to it, the half-second where the driver hesitated before responding. A natural pause, psychologists said. Cognitive load under stress. Federal agents are trained to slow down, to choose words carefully. Patrol officers are trained to interpret hesitation as threat. Two trainings colliding. When Agent Hill said the words federal operation, the audio barely registered the shift, but the camera caught it. Krell's shoulders stiffened. His head tilted, not in confusion, but in appraisal. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was crowded with assumptions. Online, the debate hardened quickly. Commentators froze frames, circled hands, zoomed in on faces. Reasonable suspicion, some said. Textbook profiling, others countered. Former officers dissected cadence and stance, recognizing the muscle memory of control. Civil rights attorneys focused on the language, how requests hardened into commands, how authority stopped negotiating. One phrase, spoken without volume but heavy with implication, became the fulcrum. It wasn't a slur. It didn't need to be. It landed because of when it was said, and to whom. Inside the department, the mood shifted from defensive to cautious. Public Affairs drafted statements with surgical neutrality. We are aware of the footage. We are reviewing all facts. No one said the word racism. Not yet. Silence, again, as strategy. Krell watched the video alone that night. No investigators, no union rep. Just the screen and the quiet whir of a desk fan. He saw things he hadn't felt in the moment, the way his voice tightened. The way he cut off the woman in the back seat without looking at her. He remembered his certainty. Watching it now, certainty felt thinner. Across town, Hill watched it too. He noticed different things. The missed radio call. The moment the lights went on, unnecessary, escalatory. He felt the old, familiar calculation surface. How calm to remain. How much to assert without provoking. A calculus black federal agents knew well, even with badges in their pockets. By the third day, protests gathered outside headquarters. Not large, not violent, just present. Signs leaned against barricades. Names were spoken into megaphones, carried by wind and frustration. The department released another statement. Krell's status remained unchanged. Administrative leave. Investigation ongoing. Then came the leak that mattered. An internal email timestamped, authenticated, confirmed what the footage implied. The department had been notified of the federal operation days earlier. Not Krell personally, but the system, the chain, the thing policy trusted to work. Trust, it turned out, was the weakest link. As the video crossed state lines and entered national feeds, the narrative stopped being about one stop. It became about patterns, about who is believed when authority collides, and whether procedure is strong enough to survive bias, when no one is watching except the camera that never blinks. The courtroom smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper, a place designed to feel neutral and never quite succeeding. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flattening faces, draining drama from the room. This was where narratives came to be reduced, compressed into transcripts, measured in objections, and sustained rulings. Months had passed since the stop. Long enough for the outrage to cool into paperwork, long enough for memory to harden. Officer Krell sat at the defense table in a dark suit that felt unfamiliar on his shoulders. The badge was gone now, replaced by a small enamel pin that caught the light only when he moved. He kept his hands folded, posture straight, the muscle memory of command still present even as the authority itself had been stripped away. His attorney leaned in occasionally, whispering reminders. Say less. Pause. Don't fill the silence. Across the aisle, Agent Hill sat with the plaintiff's counsel, equally still. The two men didn't look at each other. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been said on tape. The judge entered without ceremony, no gavel drama. Just a nod, a seat, the soft rustle of robes. The case title was read aloud. Civil rights violations under state and federal law. Unlawful detention, interference with a federal investigation. The words sounded heavier spoken than they ever had in writing. Depositions began where these things always do: training. How many hours of bias recognition training did you complete in the last 5 years? The plaintiff's attorney asked, voice calm, almost conversational. Krell answered honestly. The number wasn't 0, it never was. But it wasn't enough to feel reassuring when spoken aloud. Policies followed. Interagency protocols. The investigator's voice was precise, methodical, walking the court through manual and revisions, highlighting language Krell had once skimmed and forgotten. Verify credentials. De-escalate. Contact supervision immediately when federal authority is asserted. The words were unambiguous. The gap lay between knowing them and living them. Then came the footage. The courtroom watched together. No commentary, just sound and light, and the subtle shift in the air. When a room realizes it's seeing something familiar and uncomfortable, a few jurors leaned forward. One looked away when the lights flashed on screen. When Hill took the stand, his testimony was brief. He spoke about procedure, about patience, about the quiet calculations officers and agents make when hierarchy blurs. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He didn't need to. His restraint carried its own weight. Did you feel targeted? The attorney asked. Hill paused, not for effect, for accuracy. I felt dismissed, he said finally, and I knew why. No objection was raised. None was needed. Behind closed doors, city attorneys recalculated case law was not on their side. Prior rulings had established clear boundaries around detention and interference, especially where race intersected with authority. Risk assessments were updated. Numbers were exchanged in low voices. The word settlement entered the room softly, like an admission. By the end of the week, it was official. $280,000. No admission of wrongdoing, no trial verdict. A line item in the city's budget, and a footnote in a press release. The agreement required policy review, additional training, and an internal disciplinary conclusion already in motion. Krell received the notice in the hallway outside the courtroom. Termination. Effective immediately, the union would not appeal. The cost-benefit analysis had been made without him. He stood there for a moment after everyone else had moved on, the echo of footsteps fading understand finally what accountability felt like when it arrived not as punishment, but as inevitability. And still, the question lingered whether this ending would be enough to change what came next. Reform doesn't arrive with sirens. It comes quietly, folded into memos and meeting agendas. Its language cautious and deliberately uncelebratory. Weeks after the settlement, a revised protocol circulated through the department. Interagency encounters now required immediate supervisory escalation, mandatory verification channels, and a hard pause built into procedure when federal authority was asserted. The pause mattered. It was written in plain language, impossible to miss. Stop, verify, de-escalate. The city called it progress. Inside a training room on the third floor, new recruits watched the footage without commenter. The instructor let it play all the way through, no rewinds, no annotations. When the lights came up, the room stayed quiet longer than scheduled. Someone finally asked what everyone else was thinking, not about policy, but about instinct. The instructor didn't answer directly. He talked about stress, about how bias rarely announces itself, about how authority feels most threatened when it's uncertain. The lesson wasn't moral, it was practical, and that made it harder to ignore. Agent Hill returned to work 2 days after the settlement. A different team, a different corridor. The case resumed with fresh eyes and a thinner margin for error. They caught the target weeks later in a routine stop, 3 counties north. No drama, no cameras. The arrest didn't make the news. Hill read the report once, then filed it away. Closure, he had learned, rarely looks the way you imagine it will. Officer Krell faded from public view. His name lingered online for a while, attached to arguments that hardened into camps. Some defended him as a casualty of politics. Others held him up as proof of something deeper. He didn't engage. He took a job that didn't involve a badge or a radio, learned how quiet a day could be when no one deferred to his voice. Authority once lost has a way of revealing how much of a person was built around it. The department released its annual report that winter. Buried between statistics and budget tables was a short section on accountability, 3 paragraphs acknowledging the incident without naming it, outlining training expansions and oversight changes. It was careful language, necessary language. Still, it marked something real, an institution admitting, however cautiously, that harm could originate from within. Outside headquarters, the protests never returned. Outrage had moved on, as it always did. What remained were subtler shifts, supervisors intervening earlier on calls, officers hesitating just long enough to reassess, radios crackling with questions that once would have gone unasked. Not transformation, but movement. In the end, justice didn't feel like victory. It felt like exhaustion. A city paid a price. A career ended. A policy changed. None of it restored the lost night under the overpass, the investigation fractured by seconds and pride, but it did something quieter, and perhaps more durable. It left a record. A record that said authority is not absolute, that jurisdiction is not a weapon, that bias, when unexamined, can derail more than a moment. It can undo months of careful work and trust, built slowly, deliberately, across lines that matter. The camera had captured everything. Not just the mistake, but the system's response to it. And long after the headlines faded, that footage continued to do what no speech or slogan ever could force those who watched it to sit with the uncomfortable truth that power is only legitimate when it is restrained. Under the overpass, traffic still roars at night. Cars still idle. Officers still make decisions in seconds that will echo for years. The difference now is that somewhere, in a training room or a courtroom or a quiet office, someone remembers the story and pauses.